support, then Majority Leader Schumer failed to bring a single one of those bills to the floor. Not one. I'm also not here to tell you about the impact the Schumer shutdown would have on our national security, on our economy, and on the American people and their families. Instead of doing any of that, I think I'll just let the Democrats speak for themselves. Let's turn the clock way back to the fall of 2013, when the series finale of Breaking Bad was aired and when the word selfie was added to the Oxford Dictionary. Though it may seem like ages ago, many of the Senate Democrats who are here now similarly found themselves on the edge of a government shutdown in 2013. Let's listen to what they had to say. Senator Durbin said shutting down the government was, quote, no way to run a country. Senator Hirono agreed, stating, quote, dysfunction is not the proper way to govern. Senator Warren also echoed her colleagues and explained, quote, hostage tactics are the last resort for those who can't otherwise win their fights through elections, can't win their fights in Congress, can't win their fights for the presidency, and can't win their fights in courts. I don't disagree. The American people made the winners very clear when they went to the polls last November, and the Democrats lost their fights for Congress and for the presidency. I'd be remiss not to note all the left-wing radical policies that continue to be challenged and also lose through the courts. Out of touch with reality and fresh out of ideas, the Democrats have made a short-sighted play to back the Schumer shutdown. Look at the dog and pony show they're putting on right now. The Democrats are attempting to extort a laundry list of what President Trump has rightly called, quote, unserious and ridiculous demands. These demands include restoring taxpayer-funded health care for illegal aliens, wiping out a $50 billion rural hospital support fund, and sending your tax dollars overseas for climate initiatives. In short, Democrats want to add $1.4 trillion in new spending to pay for the partisan pet projects that were soundly rejected by the American people last November. Radical Democrats refuse to be reasonable and negotiate in good faith. This reinforces a point that Senator Jack Reed made back in 2013 when he said, quote, forcing the government to shut down for reasons the vast majority of Americans disagree with is a terrible signal and could create undue hardships for families and businesses. This statement is as true now as it was then. Democrats who support the Schumer shutdown are voting to withhold the paychecks of air traffic controllers, our troops, federal custodial staff, and countless other hardworking Americans. As Senator Sanders put it in 2013, quote, shutting the government down will disrupt the economy and cost us jobs. Senator Schatz added, quote, every moment that the government remains closed endangers our economy and American families across the country. Bottom line, the Democrats have acknowledged that a shutdown is not some political stunt. As they said, a government shutdown can threaten national security by, for example, disrupting military training and recruiting, disrupting ongoing work to modernize our nuclear forces, and creating uncertainty in our defense supply chains. That's hardly a model of peace through strength that Americans have demanded of their elected officials. But rather than listen to the American people, Senator Schumer and the Democrats make their own absurd demands. To make matters worse, the Democrats are conflating the budget process with policymaking, an approach that they have long condemned. Senator Murphy perhaps put it best in 2013 when he said, quote, there is a time and place to debate health care, just like there's a time and place to debate energy policy and immigration and education, but not when the funding of the federal government and all the lives are impacted by it hang in the balance. Senator Murphy in 2013, there's a time and place to debate health care, not when the funding of the federal government hangs in the balance. Enough is enough. Again, in 2013, more than a decade ago, Senator Klobuchar called for an end to the, quote, political gamesmanship. Likewise, Senator Blumenthal pledged to, quote, do everything possible to work with my colleagues to make sure budget brinksmanship and political gamesmanship are halted. Yet solely because of the Democrats, here we are. The political gamesmanship and the budget brinksmanship are still going on. So let me state clearly, a Schumer shutdown will be carried out at the expense and on the dime of the American people. Remember, it wasn't happenstance that the American people threw radical Democrats out of the Oval Office and congressional leadership last fall. So don't be fooled. The Schumer shutdown is a last-ditch effort to save face after spending years pushing disastrous policies that led to rising costs and skyrocketing crime. Let me leave you with one last quote from 2013. Don't hold the American people hostage simply because you're so sure you're right and everyone else is wrong. Any guess who said that one? You got it. Senator Shutdown Schumer. And because he has decided to move forward with this Schumer shutdown and has refused to take his own advice, unfortunately, the American people will be left paying the price. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to seek unanimous consent to pass H.R. 5100, a bill to extend the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs for 1 year. This bill was unanimously passed by the House of Representatives, led by the Republican chairs of both the House Small Business Committee and the House Science Committee. Hundreds of small businesses have written to Chair Ernst and to me, urging passage of the House bill to avoid ending the program. The national academies, including Trump's former Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, wrote to us urging passage of H.R. 5100. And given that the House will not be in session today, any objection or modification to this unanimously passed House bill will result in the program ending. Yet here we are, watching the clock expire on one of the most bipartisan and successful small business programs in our government. If we don't pass this bill, more than $4 billion worth of research and development funding for research institutions and small businesses is at stake. SBIR and STTR have led to technologies that have changed American lives. The world's smallest heart pump, new cancer therapies, Alzheimer's treatments, GPS, and Qualcomm wireless communication systems. This program has gone above and beyond the expectations of those who enacted it more than 40 years ago. For every SBIR dollar spent, the program returns $22 to $33 in economic benefits. And this number includes, contrary to recent rhetoric, positive returns on investment from the top 25 companies. 63% of the top 25 companies commercialized their technology. In 2024, 60% of SBIR awardees had won their first award in the last 5 years. And annually, 30% of awardees are new entrants. If we don't pass this legislation today, we will be hitting the off switch to the light bulb of innovation in our country. But that's not to say that the programs are perfect. In May, I introduced a 52-page bill with suggested improvements and extensions for the programs. And I want to provide small businesses with the certainty they deserve by making the programs permanent to ensure we do not watch the clock hit zero again. I want to increase how much agencies are required to allocate for these programs to maximize our innovation potential. I want to strengthen our commercialization efforts through better data collection, training, and designated commercialization officers. I want to increase the number of new entrants by reauthorizing and codifying new programs that aim to reach underserved populations. And I, like all of my colleagues, want to make sure that our technology never falls in the hands of our adversaries. That is why I want to continue the bipartisan program enacted in 2022, which has identified and mitigated foreign risk in its short period of implementation. According to the Department of Defense, only 0.04% of their applications have been deemed a foreign risk. If H.R. 5100 is not enacted, the current safeguards we have in place on foreign risks go away. Small businesses cut off from government funding will be left vulnerable, opening the door for foreign adversaries to swoop in and acquire American technology. And I know that none of my colleagues want that situation to become a reality. The SBIR and STTR programs are not graduation programs. They are research and development programs. These programs work because of their merit-based competition nature, Darwinian, paranoia-inducing competition. Kicking successful companies out of these programs would be like cutting your highest scorers after winning the NBA title. Instead of innovation, we would get decimation. We would be stifling potential technology critical to national security, our economy, our health, or to the next energy revolution in our country. It should not matter where these technologies come from, whether it's Massachusetts or Texas or New York or North Carolina or Iowa or any state. Our standing on the world stage of innovation depends on these small businesses. And a lapse in the program would be devastating. It would lead to expansive layoffs, setbacks to scientific advancement, and leave government-funded technology vulnerable to foreign adversaries and cut billions for small business innovators. We are already seeing the impact of uncertainty in the programs. Last week, the Department of Defense delayed their SBIR applications, and we have heard from multiple agencies that they will do the same if the program is not reauthorized. So to be clear, this was not in response to a government shutdown, but in response to Congress not coming to an agreement on the reauthorization of the SBIR and STTR programs. And that is why 5 of the 6 negotiators, including the 2 Republican House chairmen for these programs, have agreed on a 1-year extension. We all want to see improvements made, but we need the time necessary to ensure that we are making informed, evidence-based decisions that do not harm American innovation. So from my perspective, I ask my colleagues to work with the other 5 corners past the 1-year extension and work towards a longer reauthorization with the improvements we all want to see. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship be discharged and that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 5100. Further, I ask the bill be considered read a 3rd time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered and made and be laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, the status quo will not work. I cannot continue to let China win, allow waste to run rampant, or fail our warfighters. When it comes to foreign influence and the SBIR, STTR programs, the fox is in the henhouse, and my colleague wants to shut the door and check back in a year. America's seed fund is in trouble. $5 billion of agencies' R&D budgets are set aside each year for American startups to develop critical technology. In practice, however, too many large companies, not truly small businesses, drain millions of taxpayer dollars by churning out white papers, instead of turning the taxpayers' investments into reality. In the past decade, 25 companies alone in the Pentagon's SBIR program received 18% of the funding. A single company received $650 million, more award dollars than the total issued to all companies in 26 states combined. Even the Pentagon's Defense Innovation Board concluded that the SBIR program has consistent overinvestment in a small number of companies that fail to deliver scalable capabilities to warfighters, warranting direct corrective action. In short, our warfighters are not properly benefiting from the billions of dollars being invested into SBIR mills. Additionally, companies linked to our adversaries funnel taxpayer-funded intellectual property into communist China and beyond. I have been crystal clear that I cannot support a one-year clean extension of the SBIR STTR programs unless meaningful reforms are included to ensure every dollar serves America's investments. In just 2023 and 2024, we know 835 applications for SBIR STTR funding were flagged for foreign risks. 835. Yet, only 303 of those applications were denied. Even worse, a lack of foreign due diligence standards across government has opened the door for exploitation. Some agencies denied 100% of those flagged applications, while other agencies denied less than 1% of those flagged applications. When I shared my report with the Pentagon, they agreed that there are significant threats to our national security that must be addressed. If this program is to be extended, our taxpayers deserve to know that their representatives are, at a minimum, stopping wasteful spending to unproductive firms and implementing urgent safeguards to protect technology from our adversaries. That's why my amendment to H.R. 5100 would provide a 30-day extension of the SBIR and STTR programs with necessary reforms. Simply, this measure would, number one, root out waste and prioritize our truly small businesses by establishing a reasonable lifetime limit on SBIR funding, which would affect only 0.2% of participants in the program. And two, counter Chinese espionage by standardizing the foreign risk definition across our federal agencies. It's common sense, folks. We shouldn't be serving as a subsidy for Beijing when we are unleashing the golden age of America. But that risk is real and present today. And additional taxpayer dollars cannot go out the door unless we secure this program now. Our country cannot and should not delay these reforms any longer. If my colleagues truly oppose even basic safeguards, then this SBIR set-aside charade should end. And taxpayer dollars should be restored to the agency's R&D budgets, where they will better serve our warfighters and strengthen our nation's competitiveness. Instead of recklessly extending the status quo for another year, these set-aside dollars would simply be returned to each agency. And small businesses can continue to compete for those awards. I believe President Trump has assembled a world-class administration that is more than ready to deploy these R&D dollars. Unburdened by additional layers of bureaucracy, agencies can execute awards to small businesses in line with both the taxpayers' interests and our national security. I'm willing to work with you to find a common-sense solution, one that works for both sides and ultimately the American people. However, as the proposal stands, on behalf of our warfighters, our national security, and our truly small businesses, I cannot let the status quo continue. Therefore, I ask that the consent be modified and the Ernst substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection to the modification?
To object.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to oppose the substitute amendment offered by the senator from Iowa. The SBIR and STTR programs expire at midnight tonight, separate from everything else that's going on here in the Senate today. The only bipartisan option to avoid the program ending is to pass H.R. 5100, as passed by the House of Representatives already. It's before us. The Republican chairmen in the House have already passed it over to us. And as I said previously, we all have changes to the program we'd like to enact. And that's just going to take time, and they recognize that over in the House, the Republican chairman. We should extend these programs, which we should do on a bipartisan basis, while continuing to work on a bipartisan basis to address the senator from Iowa's concerns, along with other reforms that other senators and House members would like to make. So I object to this amendment because it guarantees a lapse, and because it would, one, punish successful, innovative small businesses, two, force small businesses to avoid pursuing the riskier, more cutting-edge ideas that keep American innovation at the forefront. It's the small companies that do the innovation. Big companies buy that innovation from small companies, but it's the small companies that do the innovation in our country. And prevent agencies, number three, from being able to fund technology that aids their mission if that technology comes from a successful small business. The so-called waiver included in the amendment would only result in party politics as opposed to merit-based competition. And finally, the wide-sweeping foreign due diligence changes would require agencies to forego the flexibility to determine their own risk tolerance. It would also leave the door open for agencies to deny applications on any grounds they see fit, even if it's not in statute or regulations. And to top it off, this proposal aims to dismantle the entire SBIR and STTR programs while only extending authorization for 1 month. Now is not the time to play games with small businesses and American innovation. We must make sure we do not hand over our crown jewel, American small businesses, and decades of American innovation to our foreign adversaries by allowing this program to end. So I ask my colleagues from here, I ask my colleague from Iowa to join me and the Republican chairs of both the House and Senate, the House Small Business and Science Committees, to pass the overwhelmingly supported extension for 1 year on a bipartisan basis so we can work out the differences. We should not allow this program to end. We never cap what big businesses can get from the federal government. Their tax benefits are permanent. Their ability to go to the Defense Department or other agencies with big contracts, that's never capped. And we should not be capping small businesses. So that's why we need to have the discussion, because it's critical that this program continue tomorrow. And so with that, I object.
The objection for modification is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Senator from Iowa.
Our nation cannot afford to extend another flawed program that fails to meet the innovation challenges of the 21st century. With China at our heels and wasted taxpayer dollars being funneled out the door, it's clear the status quo does not work or serve our truly small businesses. The moment for action is now, but my colleague wants to shut the door on that and continue with more of the same for another year. I'll keep working to safeguard SBIR-funded technologies from our adversaries and ensure we invest in the best and brightest small businesses so America maintains our technological advantage. However, continuing the status quo is not a solution I can support. Without my amendment, on behalf of our warfighters, our national security, and our hard-working taxpayers, therefore, I object. Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, the same Washington politicians who were whining about DOGE laying off unnecessary bureaucrats just a few months ago are now exposing who is and who isn't an essential employee by forcing a government shutdown. In the past, non-essential employees were sent home and then eventually paid for not working during a shutdown. This is an absolute waste of taxpayer dollars. With Democrats blocking passage of the bill to keep the government open, thousands of non-essential employees could be furloughed indefinitely when funding expires tonight at midnight. Instead of paying these bureaucrats for not working, the Trump administration may eliminate many of these non-essential positions altogether. Of course, our brave men and women in uniform will continue answering the call to duty without pay if there is a shutdown, as will other essential employees. But you know who will still get paid? The politicians who failed to do their jobs and caused the shutdown, namely Senator Schumer and the Democrats in Congress. Keep in mind, the bill they are blocking would keep the government funded at Biden's budget levels, go figure, while continue working out our differences. Senator Schumer himself stated earlier this year, no reasonable member on either side, Democrat or Republican, wants a government shutdown. Both sides recognize that a government shutdown would mean crushing delays to veterans programs, nutrition programs for women, infants, and children, delayed benefits for our military, and so much more. Senator Schumer went on to say, only extremists who can't win an argument are willing to shut down the government, to bully everyone else into submission. And folks, that's exactly what is happening now. But ironically, it is Senator Schumer who is being bullied by the extremists within his own party. These are the radical socialists demanding we defund the police and ICE and allow our streets and borders to once again be overcome by chaos and lawlessness. Senator Schumer previously shut down the government for over a month in a failed attempt to stop President Trump from securing our southern border. During that time, Food safety inspections were stopped. Permanent damage was done to some of our national parks. Scientific research was put on hold. Applications for small business loans became backlogged. The low-income folks, the elderly, and people with disabilities lost rental assistance and were forced to live in fear of eviction. And 300,000 federal employees who went without a paycheck for over a month were eventually paid for doing nothing, costing taxpayers $3 billion. Folks, no one wins when Democrats shut down our government. It is obvious the Democratic leader is shutting down the government for one simple reason: to protect his own job. But that's not even working. Just last week, the Washington newspaper Politico reported that across the country, the Democratic base is rebelling against Schumer's, quote, rudderless leadership. Well, folks, that's a sentiment we all share. From the far left to the right, there is widespread disappointment with Senator Schumer's inability to perform his basic duties, like doing his part to make sure our military gets paid on time and the government stays open. So on behalf of all Americans, for his rudderless leadership, his petty partisanship, and his silly shutdown shenanigans, the recipient of the Non-Essential Government Employee of the Year for 2025 is Senator Chuck Schumer. And with that, Mr. President, I yield back.
Senator from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the residents of Southern Nevada and so many others, October 1st is no ordinary day. On October 1st, 2017, my hometown of Las Vegas was struck by an unimaginable tragedy that forever changed our communities. We experienced an attack on a scale far worse than anyone could ever have imagined, a devastating tragedy that ripped families apart, destroyed lives. You know, during any given weekend, the Las Vegas Strip is buzzing with tourists and visitors from around the world, and that was the case on October 1st, 2017. That night, tens of thousands of people came to Las Vegas to attend the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival. Enjoy a fun night out with friends and good music. The weather's beautiful. But in just 10 minutes, their lives in our entire state would be changed forever. 10 minutes. 10 minutes is all it took for a gunman to open fire on an unsuspecting crowd, killing 58 innocent people, injuring thousands, and leaving a permanent scar on the hearts of everyone in our state and the hearts on the families and friends of the ones injured and killed. In the years since, we've lost 2 more individuals as a result of this tragedy, which remains the deadliest mass shooting in American history. So I want you to think about what that means. The families of the victims of that tragedy had their world shattered in just 10 minutes. 10 minutes that day that changed their lives forever. Families who now don't get to celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. Families, and I think this is one of the hardest things, they never got to say goodbye to the people that they love. And that night also changed the lives of everyone in our city. People who were attending or working at the festival, Nevadans who were just driving down the Strip, and the first responders who ran towards danger to help save lives. In the chaos and confusion of that night, our heroic first responders, our police officers, our firefighters, our paramedics ran towards the scenes. They saved countless lives. I know taxi drivers ran. Everyone ran to try to help people escape. And in the midst of this darkness, we saw our community, my community, go above and beyond to help. Our entire state rallied together. We saw lines of people around entire blocks waiting hours to donate blood, willing to donate blood to save the lives of complete strangers in the middle of a mass casualty. And I remember that day going to the line to talk to people, try to comfort folks in the midst of those first few days. And there was a woman in line to give blood, and I went up and I talked to her, and she started crying. She put her arms like this. She goes, "I don't have much." She goes, "But blood is all I have to give, and I'm here." She started crying. I started crying. It was such a moving moment. She goes, "This is what I can give," her arms outstretched. And so I want everyone to think about that the hearts of so many in a tragedy go out to those they don't even know to do what they can and give what they can, coming from the heart. And these selfless acts, not just this woman, but this is just one story of so many that I was proud to hear and be part of. This showed the country why we're Vegas strong. And I'm here today to honor the memories of those we've lost as a result of that terrible night on 1 October and everyone else who was impacted. And as we remember and reflect on this event, we must also commit ourselves to action to make sure that no other community in the nation goes through what we went through. In the last few years, we've so sadly seen shootings at universities, including UNLV in Las Vegas, in schools, in places where people go every day like supermarkets and churches. Mr. President, we saw that just this weekend. And just this year alone, there have already been 53 school shootings in the United States. And so it's clear we need to act, and there are things we can do on a bipartisan basis. The 1 October shooter relied on bump stocks. They're just dangerous devices that attach to guns to make them fire bullets even faster, so that a shooter can fire more bullets in a short period of time, in order to inflict as much pain and carnage as possible. And I hope we could agree that nobody wants that. No one wants that. And in response to this unprecedented tragedy, 2017, President Trump issued a federal rule that banned bump stocks, and it did help save countless lives from these deadly modifications. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court overturned this common-sense federal ban, allowing these dangerous bump stocks to flow into our streets once again. And so this puts more lives and communities at risk, which is why I helped introduce bipartisan legislation earlier to restore this common-sense federal ban on bump stocks. Because we have the power to do something. So let's pass this bipartisan bill and save lives before the next tragedy hits another unsuspecting community. Because trust me, nobody wants to go through this, no community. Nobody wants to give this speech. Nobody wants to look in the eyes of the families. No one wants to go to that reunification center. No one wants to go to the hospitals. No one wants to go see the memorials grow and grow time after time. No one wants to see this in community after community every single day. There has to be some common sense about what we can do. And so as we approach the 8th anniversary of the 1 October shooting, I just ask all of my colleagues in this chamber to remember and honor the memories of the victims, their families, their loved ones, everyone whose lives were forever changed that night. I also ask that we come together as Republicans and Democrats in a bipartisan way just to save lives by passing our common sense bill to ban bump stocks. I think it would make a difference. And I just pray that those out there watching find comfort in remembering that their loved ones' memory serves as a blessing to them, and that we will always continue to honor them. Thank you. Mr. President,
The senator from Nevada.
I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the following Commerce Committee detailees
Excuse me, the Senate's in a quorum call.
I beg your pardon. I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that the following Commerce Committee detailees be granted floor privileges for the remainder of Congress: Thomas Hastings, Joseph St. Peter, Tyler Stutton, Dean Legedakis, and Letitia Vega.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, for a long time, the United States has benefited from free and competitive global markets. For too long, though, we've relied on the conventional wisdom that engaging with China, and in particular the Chinese Communist Party, by bringing them into the global marketplace would be mutually beneficial. But it's become increasingly obvious, and it's plain as the nose on our face now, that China's primary interest in that so-called free market is to use it to undermine our interests and to further their own. I'm grateful to President Trump for ringing the alarm bells on China and for helping us reframe the way we look at the People's Republic of China. We need to be clear-eyed about exactly what's going on. China is not interested in a level playing field where both parties benefit from a bit of friendly competition. The People's Republic of China is treating competition in the global markets as a zero-sum game where they win and the West loses. Nowhere has this become more apparent than in the case of critical minerals and rare earth elements. I doubt many of us have given a lot of thought, at least in the years past, about the role of rare earth elements and critical minerals, but now we have become educated way too late into the importance of these two elements. There's two ways that a competitive market economy can be undermined. One is excessive government regulation, making it harder for more competitors to enter a market. This makes it more difficult for newer, smaller entrepreneurs to get off the ground. But another way for a competitive market to be threatened is when one seller has a monopoly on a particular good or service. When a single provider of a service or good gets so big that they're the only game in town, then they get to set the terms. A monopoly can ask whatever price they demand because there's no one competing with them for a cheaper or better version. This is precisely what China is doing with respect to mining and processing of rare earth and other critical minerals. But the People's Republic of China takes it one step further. They are actively sabotaging its competitors, including the United States. For a long time, up until the 1980s, the United States dominated the industry for rare earth elements. But then China decided to begin rapidly subsidizing their own rare earth industry. China benefits from some unfortunate advantages in this competition. They have lower labor costs because they're less concerned than we are in the United States about ensuring that workers are paid fairly and kept safe. And we know China has lower environmental standards than we do here in the United States, which further makes it more difficult for the United States to compete against them. But third and most critical advantage that China has over the United States in this field is that their government recognized the importance of these critical minerals a long time ago and was willing to put generous government subsidies in place to launch their industry, while somehow we were lulled into complacency and failed to realize our dependence on China and their processing of critical minerals and rare earth elements. Now, people may be asking, why do we care about critical minerals and rare earth elements? Well, the truth is these elements are essential to producing magnets and other components of our vehicles, our robotics, our aerospace, and our defense systems. We can't build our weapons systems to defend our nation and to deter aggressors without access to these processed rare earth elements and critical minerals. That's how important it is. But China has been successful in sidelining the United States and other global competitors, becoming effectively the only game in town, or I should say, in the world, when it comes to mining and processing these minerals. Well, whether we realized it or not, there's hardly an aspect of our daily life that would not be affected were China to cut off our access to these processed rare earth elements and critical minerals. From our iPhones to the cars we drive, even our washing machines. Because China recognized how important these minerals are, their government is willing to take extraordinary measures to make sure that they control the supply chain for these critical minerals in the future. What are these extraordinary measures that they've taken? Well, over the last 20 years, China has invested $57 billion through state-backed financial institutions in the forms of loans to Belt and Road participant countries in order to gain leverage over the global supply chain for these critical minerals. More than 75% of these investments are structured through joint ventures and special purpose vehicles in such a way that Chinese entities have ownership stakes, allowing them to influence the extraction and processing of these critical mineral projects. More forebodingly, last December, China took steps to ban exports of technologies used in mining and processing rare earth elements in order to exert further control over the supply chain and enhance its leverage when dealing with the United States in various binational negotiations. In April of this year, China placed export controls on 7 rare earth elements, requiring any company that wishes to export them to acquire a special license. And if they didn't, obviously it would be illegal. While the terms and conditions of the licensing process are still being spelled out in more detail, this may become the tool to incentivize various countries to act in China's interest to protect their own access to these minerals. In other words, it's not just the United States that depends on these rare earth elements and critical minerals. It's virtually every other part of the global community. And when China sees likely competitors, it floods the market with excess supply of these minerals, lowering the market price and thereby sidelining any potential competitors. Now, just to be clear, rare earth elements and critical minerals can be mined in many places across the globe. Where China has gotten the monopoly or virtual monopoly is 90% of them are processed in China. So you may mine rare earth elements or critical minerals in Chile or in the United States or Australia or somewhere else, but 90% of them must be processed in China because they're not other competitors for the reasons that I've mentioned. Because China will stop at nothing to manipulate the market, prices have dropped dramatically when they flood the market with processed minerals. Since 2023, for example, cobalt prices decreased 59.5% from $82,000 per ton to $33,000 per ton. Again, because China is manipulating the market to discourage any competition. Nickel prices decreased by 73.1% from $48,000 per ton to $13 per ton. And lithium prices decreased 86.8% from $68,000 to less than $10,000. Consequently, several plants that were designed to open up in the United States to compete with China have had to close because of their inability to maintain profitability in this economic environment. The United States' only cobalt mine opened in 2023 and was forced to close less than a year later when nickel plants in Australia and New Caledonia shut down in the same time frame. And while these competitors have closed their doors, Chinese firms have continued to hold on to their state-sponsored monopoly. China has been taking these steps for decades, right beneath our nose, to develop this near monopoly that they currently hold on mining and processing of critical elements. As the United States, we should have seen this coming, and we could have done something about it, but we didn't. Joe Biden could have spent the last 4 years in the White House tackling this issue head on, but here we are with virtually nothing to show for the Biden administration's so-called efforts. So we're playing catch-up with the Chinese Communist Party, which is not a good place to be. If another pandemic were to happen, disrupting global supply chains, or if we were to find ourselves in a hot war with China, or even difficult trade negotiations with China, which we will, and they decided to cut off trade with the United States, there would be drastic consequences to our economy, to our military preparedness, and to our ability to deter an aggressive Chinese Communist Party. Americans would not be able to purchase the electronics that power our lives day in and day out. Our Department of Defense, or Department of War as it's now called, would be hamstrung in its ability to obtain critical components for the weapon systems that are used to deter aggression by our adversaries. And elderly or chronically ill Americans would be unable to obtain the pharmaceutical remedies they rely upon to simply stay alive. Well, fortunately, while we're late to the game, things are moving now in a better direction under unified Republican control. In March of this year, for example, President Trump issued an executive order directing the Departments of Interior, Defense, or now as it's called, War, Agriculture, and Energy to work together to accelerate domestic investment and production of critical minerals. And Congress also did some things in the One Big Beautiful Bill to help. That legislation included an allocation of $2 billion to the Secretary of War to increase U.S. critical mineral stockpile through the National Defense Stockpile Transaction Fund. And an additional $5 billion was provided for investments in critical minerals through the Industrial Base Fund. Furthermore, this law tightened our definitions of foreign entity of concerns, which will help ensure that Chinese critical mineral companies are not availing themselves of the U.S. tax credits in order to invest in their own critical mineral efforts. While there are ongoing discussions to ensure that the defense authorization bill that we are currently on includes provisions such as the reauthorization of the Development Finance Corporation that our colleagues, Senators Risch and Shaheen, have sponsored this year, we need to make sure they're successful in those efforts. The Development Finance Corporation works to incentivize private capital markets to invest in our most critical supply chains. I've introduced something called the Critical Minerals Security Act, which directs the Department of Interior and Department of State to further identify vulnerabilities in U.S. supply chains for critical minerals. Now, I believe these are important steps, but Mr. President, we have a bigger problem in America. We simply have a hard time building things anymore. A lot of that has to do with overregulation, problems with gaining the appropriate permits, and the litigation environment, which means that any sort of critical infrastructure is probably going to be delayed years, maybe decades, from endless lawsuits. That is a larger, more threatening situation, and I'm only talking about a small part of it here today. The steps we've taken so far are, unfortunately, too late, in my view, but they are at least a step in the right direction. They're not enough by themselves to ensure that we have safe and secure supply chains for both mining and processing of critical minerals to meet our nation's needs. But once again, Deng Xiaoping, who said, "Hide your motives and bide your time," has successfully snookered the United States and our other allies around the world so that we are now almost entirely dependent on Chinese processing of critical minerals. So there's not a day to wait. We need to make sure that we catch up, and we catch up quickly. It's going to take a lot of work for the United States to claw our way back to where we need to be. But I'm confident that we can if we rise to meet the occasion. So I would urge all of my colleagues to listen to and respond to this alarm bell that I'm trying to ring here on the Senate floor today, and take seriously the urgency of securing our supply chains and securing American processing facilities for critical minerals. We simply do not have a choice. Otherwise, we will continue to be held hostage by an adversary that does not wish us well. They don't want friendly competition, they want dominance. And they also want to take Taiwan in the coming years. If we can't build things because we can't deter them by building the weapons necessary to do that, if we can't sustain our economy by continuing to manufacture technology that allows us to compete with China in the coming years, we will have failed in our fundamental responsibility as members of Congress. If America is to have a safe, secure, and prosperous future, we have to compete and we have to win the critical minerals race with the People's Republic of China. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that the previously scheduled recess begin immediately.
Without objection. Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15 p.m.